The richest man in the world will not be attending a gathering of the richest men in the world because he says it'll be boring AF. That's as friends say it will be. And that's Elon Musk's opinion of the meeting of the World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland. Gentlemen, I think Davos is interesting for a variety of reasons. One, you've got, well, if I were a mean-spirited guy, I might call it a target-rich environment. But you have the richest and most powerful people in the world all gathering in one place to, well, frankly, try and determine the rest of our fates. How successful they'll ever be in that is, I suppose, up to us. But I've come up with a theory about what they're really up to at Davos, and I'll get to that in a second. Before I do, though, part of me wonders if Davos might be losing a bit of its charm for the richest and most powerful. Elon Musk won't be there. He says it's boring. Go ahead.
Can I interrupt you for 1 second, Steve? Could you just explain to people what that is for those people who may not be familiar with what's going on at Davos and the World Economic Forum?
The World Economic Forum was started by a German billionaire, Klaus Schwab.
German billionaire and Bond villain in 1971.
And Bond villain, yes. He's very much into things like all kinds of social controls and global depopulation and just generally bad stuff. But he won't be in attendance this year, even though it's his WEF that puts on Davos. He's claiming a scheduling conflict, as though he didn't know this thing were going on. George Soros.
Plus, he's also like 84 years old.
Yeah, he is. George Soros won't be there. Another Bond villain billionaire. There's a rumor he's having some health issues. I don't know if that's true or not. Also not in attendance this year, Joe Biden, Janet Yellen, Bill Gates. These are some pretty big names, whatever you happen to think of them as individuals. Before we get into all the paranoid stuff, which, believe me, I will, I just want to ask, when you see, Bill, these big names not in attendance, does this make you think that Davos is no longer such a big deal, or has maybe the real power moved to something a little quieter?
I think there's no question that the brand has become a little more toxic. It's been under the radar for most of its existence, and for the last 2 or 3 years, ever since it became known that Klaus Schwab had said it was originally an attendee at the World Economic Forum, so a woman, I believe from Montreal, who basically said, "I'm 30 years old, I don't own anything, I don't own my apartment, I rent everything, and I'm happier than I've ever been." So World Economic Forum took that and tweeted it out as, in the future, no one will own anything and everybody will be happy. No one will own anything, really? Okay. So that got a lot of mileage. They've been beaten up a lot on rightfully so for the. Cause see, here's the thing about Davos. They say the quiet part out loud and they do it on camera, and once it started to hit critical mass in terms of enough people knew who this was. I'd never heard of Schwab 2 years ago. I had no idea who he was. I have a real good idea who he is now. Yeah. And I suspect that I know for a fact that they've said that they are now going to have to launch a kind of a counter campaign, to buff up their image. So it's possible that these guys wanted to. The fact that Schwab isn't there is he didn't have a schedule. This is his entire life. This is the only thing he does. The one meeting of the no. So they're just plain awful people. And when I say they're awful people, you can listen to these seminars that they give at the World Economic Forum, and you get guys who say that no, consciousness is simply a series of chemical reactions. It's just a chemical algorithm.
Straight out of
and we can crack and we can crack that algorithm. And once we crack that algorithm, we'll be able to tell people what they're going to do before they do it. And these are the same guys that think they can transport human intelligence into silicon machines and so on and live forever. And they're the people that are determined that, it'd probably be good for the planet if we were to reduce it by 80% of the population. And these are the people. I was listening to one of them today from the current speech, just a clip. She was talking about how they're going to be able to, now they're able to hack the human genome and they'll be able to add super intelligence and all the rest of this stuff. I noticed they haven't found the wisdom gene yet, but they'll be working to avoid that. But here's what she said. She said, and this is considered a feature. This is like something to look forward to. She says, already we have the technology for smart glasses, much like the ones I was wearing now. So she's wearing glasses that look like this, right? So So she says, we already have the technology for smart glasses to remove from your vision things that you don't want to see. Like if there's garbage by the side of the road, we can make sure that you don't see that. Homeless people, we can make sure you don't see that either. And I thought, that may be the most dystopic thing I've ever
straight out of
heard.
They Live.
And that's quite a bar to clear when you're dealing with the World Economic Forum. But it's like, we have the technology to make sure that you can go through life in your little bubble that you're living in now. And if you should ever have to leave the skyscraper, we'll make sure that you don't have to witness the starving people or the dead bodies or the piles of garbage or the food riots or the burning buildings. We'll just take it out. And these people are so deep into the trap of intellectualism, they genuinely think that 50 of them knows what's better for 8 billion people than the 8 billion people do. They genuinely believe this. And the only thing that I think is hopeful is that they're not going to achieve any of these things. However, Schwab, in maybe it was a taped introduction because I heard him open the thing, he said that this might be the year of, what did he call it? Polydemics.
Polydemics.
As in
Yes,
multiple epidemics?
Multiple epidemics, yes.
Oh, polydemics. Yeah. Okay, I get it.
Yeah, polydemics. I think that was a term he uses, poly something. And he starts a speech by saying, the world is in such a state of crisis. There are so many ongoing crises that are converging on 2023 that we must sit down now and figure out a master plan for the future. I'm thinking, what crises are you talking about? I know about the well-advertised one, right? There's going to die in 3 years if we don't shut everything down. But this idea that that you can, like I say, Steve, they say the quiet part out loud, right? Yeah. We're going to create a sense that the world is heading for such imminent catastrophe that the only solution will be to allow this small group of super genius elites and their one world government to take the reins before we go careening off the cliff into extinction. And I think they're a little surprised. In fact, I know they're a little surprised. In fact, I know they're quite surprised that regular people not only seem to have a problem with this, but are pushing back against it. The plebes.
Yeah. Some of the pushback came last year in the Netherlands, where thanks to this whole global environmental movement, most people don't know this, but the Netherlands is the world's second largest food exporter after the United States, and the government is shutting down the farms left and right. That's
by far the most efficient farmers in the world,
yes.
Including Americans, by far.
Yes, and so we're at a time with 8 billion people, and on purpose, they are shutting down the world's second largest food exporter.
3,000 farms.
Yeah. It's madness, but it is part of this depopulation.
And what's the pretext for that?
It's been good for the environment.
Climate.
They're reducing carbon.
Oh,
yeah.
I see.
And Bill Gates, the computer guy, who's one of the key founding members of this, is the largest holder of agricultural land in the United States. He may be the largest holder of agricultural land in the world.
He may be on the board, but I doubt he's a founding member. It started in 1971. He was pretty young back then.
Okay. Well, in that case, he owns, I think the number last, if I remember correctly, something like 270,000 acres of farmland.
Wow.
That sounds like an awful lot. Scott,
get hurt with dirt.
At this year's WEF, a Swiss MP proposed that we change our cities where there's no individual ownership of cars, and that will punish businesses that don't align with environmental goals. Jane Goodall said, you remember Jane Goodall, Gorillas in the Mist?
The monkey lady.
She said, apes, not monkeys. She said at the 2020 conference that we need to reduce the human population by about 7.5 billion people. So, Bill, not 80%, more like 95% of the human population.
By the way, Gorillas in the Mist was Dian Fossey. Jane Goodall was a chief researcher.
That's right. My bad. She was applauded for that statement, by the way. Brian Stelter is currently hosting a panel about the clear and present danger of disinformation, which is like me.
Are you serious?
Which is like me hosting a sobriety panel.
That's expertise
for
you.
If they've got Brian Stelter, then my fear of these people went way down by 2 orders of magnitude.
Oh, right. By the way, Brian Stelter looks like he's been eating a little too many beetle burgers, even more so than before. So yeah, Scott, they're really open about this stuff. We're supposed to eat beetle burgers. Meat is going to become a delicacy eat your bugs, peasants, until there aren't any of you left. Last year, or maybe the year before, I can't remember, I coined the phrase that paranoid now is just being 3 weeks ahead of the news cycle. Is there anything to say to comfort people that these billionaires, these government officials don't actually mean it?
Well, first of all, I think part of the comfort comes from actually hearing them say it out loud. I want them to say it out loud. I want them to say it very publicly on recorded media of some sort. I want it to be broadcast throughout the corners of the globe so that everybody knows exactly what's being said, and all of it, not just the clips that are selectively chosen. Because I'm sure if you went to it, it would be more like Elon Musk's reaction, which is 99% of it is boring as heck, and there's really nothing. Like, if you went to it once, you'd go, well, the next time I'm going to skip the sessions and just hang out in the hotel bar. So, because it's not that compelling. So number one, I want him to keep talking. Number two, if I were a Hollywood screenwriter, I would go there every year because, what a rich environment for the depths and the heights of human experience and depravity. And there is a utopianism about it all that says if we, originally Klaus Schwab was a young academic. And, if getting a bunch of academics together along with the enlightened business people, and the way you get enlightened as a business person is you become a billionaire. Up till then, you were just a scrappy, filthy capitalist. But then once you become a billionaire, then you're an enlightened individual. And getting them together to fantasize about a world being a better place while the world is basically saying, we don't want to be a better place. Leave us alone. There are some little adjustments we'd like to make at the margins, but we don't want to fundamentally transform our way of life in the way that you envision. I read a brief interview with Klaus Schwab in the Wall Street Journal, and I felt like it was time ill spent, only because even though it was a very brief interview, nothing was said. And then I heard a story on National Public Radio about the World Economic Forum meeting, and it seemed like a recurring theme was this crisis of what they were calling deglobalization. And the deglobalization is basically the result of the shock of the COVID pandemic, which made people suddenly reevaluate, business people reevaluate sourcing of especially hard products, of tangible things, and your ability to be able to have, the focus was on, hey, how can we do it cheaply, taking advantage of the global marketplace? And now it is, how can we do it reliably, realizing that when crisis hits, when crisis hits, then we may be in a pinch, and no matter how cheap it was, you can't get it at any price. And so that's, I think, a useful thing for those people to think about. But I did notice in what you said and also what I read and heard, there was this recurring theme of epidemic, logistical crisis, inflation, global warming, Ukraine war. And it made me think that even if you have the best intentions and you want to solve the world's problems, if you spend all your time trying to solve the world's problems, you eventually come to a viewpoint that says the world is nothing but problems. And you can't see anything else. And so your day-to-day life, and I see some very sincere, well-intentioned people who are upset about one injustice or crisis or another, and they become so wrapped up in that they miss out on the joy of life. And relationships are damaged as a result of it. And, they're basically shutting down and narrowing in on this area that's not working right, and it becomes everything to them, as if you held your thumb up in front of your eye and could no longer see the moon. And so I think that is the challenge faced by any group of people that wants to get together and come up with better ways of doing things, is eventually you begin to think, well, nothing's working, everything has to be changed, and your vision of what's possible becomes colored by your perspective that everything is a mess. And it's just not. And so I feel sorry for these people. And finally, on the topic of Jane Goodall and depopulation, you first, honey.
Right. Yeah. Paul Ehrlich, who they dug up practically from the grave, is saying the same thing. After 60 years of being wrong, this guy is back in the news. You were saying, Bill?
Real quick, Steve. Yeah. First of all, the World Economic Forum, I love the idea that deglobalization has happened because of COVID, because the WEF was singing the praises of lockdowns and how good it was for the planet, they put together a little film that basically that showed like Times Square empty, right? There's no cars in Times Square, like Omega Man kind of thing, right? There's nobody there. And they're saying, the lockdowns had a lot of benefits. World carbon output was cut by half. Yeah. The amount of noise, ambient noise in the cities went down by 50%. In fact, the Earth got so quiet that scientists were able to listen to micro earthquakes that they'd never been able to hear before in order to predict large earthquakes in the future. And they had all these good reasons why it was just grand that everybody had been locked in. And the ratio on this, when people saw this, was so appalling that they took it down. But I do want to say just one thing I wanted to lead with this, actually. A lot of people, I'm obviously an Elon Musk fan. A lot of people say, well, Elon Musk does this, and I get all of that, right? But I remember thinking, okay, if Elon Musk is going to the World Economic Forum, that will significantly reduce my respect for him, significantly increase my suspicion of him. And the fact that he didn't go is reassuring to me, because he may be an eccentric billionaire, control freak lunatic, but at least he's our eccentric billionaire control freak lunatic. And he tweeted, he said something like, I think he said, the direct quote was, first of all, I think it's going to be boring, and secondly, it kind of gives me the willies. But
yeah, he was cheeky and then he said, about I'm sure, which I love that.
But I'm sure, he said, but I'm sure everything's okay. And then he did those eyes, that eye emoji,
googly eyes.
Are you sure?
And the only other thing I wanted to say about this, since the name came up, is we passed another significant milestone in the colonization of space since we did this last show. SpaceX launched 2 vehicles on the same evening from 2 separate launch complexes. Oh. That means that we don't just have a robust single spaceport access to space now with 193 consecutive recoveries of boosters. Now we can launch from 2 different places at the same time, and pretty soon we'll be able to launch from 3. I think there's one was Vandenberg, one was Kennedy, and you've still got Texas, right? So if you've got a company that's able to launch 2 completely separate missions that just happen to be better for the orbital mechanics to launch them on the same night, that's what you would call, that's capacity. That's reserve capacity. That's a bench. You got a good bench.
Bill, I think about the same week, they did a Falcon Heavy launch for Space Force and nailed those booster landings side by side on landing pads on Earth. It was amazing.
Bill.
So in 4 days, they launched two Falcon 9s at the same night. And then it was going to be 2 days later, but they pushed it back a couple days. Then they launched the Falcon Heavy and nailed that. And that ability to do 2 missions at the same time, I don't believe NASA. Well, that's not true. NASA did that with the Gemini. I want to say 6 and 7, but in any event, it's impressive.
I almost did my segment this week on this very topic, so I'm going to go off on a little tangent of my own here real quick. Bill, there's even more to it than you said, because at the same time they had a Dragon crew coming back from the International Space Station, and they had something else in orbit as well. I can't remember what it was off the top of my head. But when NASA launches anything, they have the institutional resources to focus on that one launch, and that's the one big thing, and that's it. SpaceX having this ability makes them just the biggest player, not just now, but ever.
I'd
hate to see what would happen if Elon Musk were not so distracted by Twitter.
Or Tesla, or the Boring Company, or anything else
Tesla
like
just
that.
slashed their prices. During the same week, Tesla dropped the average cost of a car by $7,500 to $13,000 or something.
Yeah, big cuts. It's getting to be a competitive
I'm
market.
so glad he didn't go. I'm so glad he didn't go.
Yeah. Tesla shares have been priced up until they crashed like Tesla was a tech company, not a car maker. But they're a car maker, and those shares had to come back to earth, so to speak. Gentlemen, there's a lot going on here with the paranoid stuff. Bill, you mentioned this, that vision of 2030 that was written by a Danish member of parliament, and the article said, "Welcome to 2030. I own nothing, have no privacy, and life has never been better." And the WEF didn't just tweet that out. They actually published it on their website. And when the commotion hit, they scrubbed it. They tried to pretend like it didn't exist. And now there's a thing going around where the paranoid right made this up, except we've got the screen caps, okay? This was on the WEF website.
I've never been so proud to be paranoid right-winger in my life.
Right? They really are out to get you. And it gave me this vision of the future. They want us not to have cars. You'll be able to call an Uber or ride the bus if it's the hours that the bus is running and your social credit is in good enough standing to
And
to get
if
on
your
the
social
Uber.
score is good enough, because if that QR code goes red like it did in China, you are locked in your house,
Yeah.
and you can't get food, and you can't get on a bus. You're done.
You are done. You'll eat your bugs. Everything you'll have to watch on TV in your little apartment will be woke and monotonous and boring as hell. The best, I guess you could say, is that pot and shrooms will be legal to give you something to do to pass your wretched hours. And my theory is they can't do the whole Nazi death camp or Soviet gulag thing anymore. Nobody will put up with that. But if they can just keep us locked up and bored to death, we'll just depopulate ourselves. Now, maybe I sound paranoid, but 3 years ago, the paranoid ones were the ones who turned out to be mostly right. So we'll see what happens. The good news is, who was it? I've got my notes here. Christopher Rufo, who's just a brilliant guy. He's going to be running. He's going to be on the board of that university that DeSantis is turning into a real liberal arts school again. He had this Twitter thread, I think on Monday, that's a real must read. You should look for it. He said, I want the political right to be effective, and the focus on the WEF is a distraction and an inferiority complex. Yeah. He says, if instead of the WEF we focus on civil service reform, institutional governance, anti-ESG legislation, and higher education reform, we'd be much better off. In other words, we're going to steal a line for the left. Think globally, act locally. And that's your right angle on that, brought to you by the members of BillWhittle.com. Hey, just one more time. If you're watching these for free, totally worth it, but you'll feel even better if you become one of our producers. So join BillWhittle.com today. We'd love to have you on board. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you next time.